All right, we're back. It is COMP1073 in the winter 2017 semester, client-side scripting at Georgian College. Week 5, part 2 of our broadcast. We just finished talking about some really ugly code, right? Which we did over here. I put this up on GitHub. Right now it should be up. And to test that up online, if I go back up online, here's my lesson. If I refresh, we're still good. If I go to my projects, we see this, but I got a problem. I don't want to make my image so big, right? Now, there are curious ways to make this smaller, right? And I could produce an image height difference, but then we're not going to fill up this entire screen, right? And I've kind of balanced it for this. I've also chosen a couple things. If you notice in my code, in my my project.html, I called up an image, and if I was going to look at the source for the image itself, here's the source. Remember, it's a placeholder image of 400 by 300, right? 400 by 300, right? That's what it is. I could make this smaller in height. I could make it 400 by 200, right? This is far preferred, 400 by 200, than rescaling everything. I don't mind 400 because we can always go this way. But if I start playing with this one, height with code, typically I don't want to modify my images. The real way to do it is make sure all your images are scaled properly, right? And you want to scale them according to your design more than with code. You want to do code the last thing, because anytime you scale anything up with code up and down, you're already doing that with the size of my screen. It becomes even more computationally expensive. So we're going to change this from 400 by 300 to 400 by 200. And let's see if that makes a difference. So save, go back. It didn't do much, right? My 400 by 200 didn't do it, right? So you can see that if I refresh the image on the screen, no difference. How about if I try another size? So did I save this first of all? Did I save my projects page? I did, right? The other thing, let's try another size. Let's take 400 by 150. Is that possible? 400 by 150. Is there such an image? Right? And if I save, it makes no difference, right? Well, I'm looking at the wrong thing, Tom. It's really this. But here's what's happened, right? I try and make it 400 by 300 or 400 by 150. If I go back to what it was, 400 by 300, looks like this. If I go by 400 by 200, it gives me this. I lose part of the computer, right? And if I go 400 by 400, this is the placeholder image, right? It becomes really massive, right? So I want to go back to 4 by 3, right? That's what I want to do. But what I want to do is I want to talk about, because this is the kind of image we're getting a placeholder, right? And what I want to do is in here, inside my app.js, I could make it modify. I could modify it here, right? But this is a CSS job. Truly, it's a CSS issue, right? My image has an image. It's first project image. That's what it's called. So I would target it with CSS first. Remember the way it goes first. HTML, strong HTML. Number 2, strong CSS. Then behavior with JavaScript. JavaScript is last, right? Once I start monkeying with JavaScript's presentation first, then I'm skipping by what CSS can do way easier, right? And always do CSS first before JavaScript. So I can access that ID of first project image, right? And what I want to do is I want to say my maximum height is equal to, let's say, 60%. Is that, can that be? Would that work? Well, yeah, okay, that kind of worked, but didn't really do anything. Max height is 60%. Oh, max height of 30%. Is that good? Well, I got no effect. How come there's no effect? Max height of 10%. Woo! No effect. First of all, do we have the right name? That's the first thing. So I go to project.html, first project image. Yeah, that's cool. But I'm modifying this, the image. Can I modify the image CSS-wise with a max height value? Right? And what is the height value? That's why heights are weird, right? And how about my div tag? Can I do the same thing with my div tag? It's responsive, so it's going to respond. That's another thing. There's two things fighting here. I get a responsive image, and I'm trying to tell it that there's a max height, right? For max height, we probably don't want to use percent. We probably want to use a fixed amount of space. Let's say, for example, 200 pixels. Let's try that. Now we have a number that we can tap into. Before, we didn't even know what the height is of this thing. So if I go max height for my project image is 200 pixels, and if I go back, now you can see that that worked, right? 200 pixels. But, oh, sadly, this layout is no good, right? Because I see my image, but then, you know, I can still do this, 50%, 75% of whatever I had before, 50, 75, and show, 50, 75, hide, 50, 75, show, 75, right, 50. And then there seems to be no appreciable difference now between this size and this size. How come? We're not being effective anymore. Why aren't we being effective anymore? Because my max width is the property that we're changing here, not the max height. We're not changing the property of the size of the image. If you go back to my code, right, remember I talked about how they conflict? Well, look at my code. I'm saying max width is 75%. Maybe with 200 height, my max width would be 75%, right? So that makes no sense. And in fact, my max width should be a different number, right? A different way of doing things. And we can talk about that later on. How do I figure out the width of my image? Can I get the width of my image? Is it possible? Come on, guys. How do I get the width of my image? Well, let's do it like this. I know I have my first project image. Can I get a width property? Can I say console.log? I won't do it here. I'll do console.log here and here. So here's console log. And then I'll say my backtick. We'll do the backtick, right? Here's backtick. Width, right? And this is at 3/4, right? So 3/4 width, right, is equal to, we'll do some interpolation, and we'll say that it's first project image, right, dot width. Can I do that? Or do I have to go get attribute, get width, something like that? Can I do that? What do I need to use to get the width of something? I want to get I've already tapped into it, but I want to know the width of my object. Is there a way of doing that? Right? I want to read the width. I want to measure the width, if you will, of my image. Is that possible? Can I do that? Okay, what does that give me though? That's percent, or is that in pixels? That's percent. Let's see. Style.width. Right? I don't think so. I don't think it's going to return anything. This is just not going to work, right? Huh? Nope. Why don't you look it up? Look up how do I get can I get the width of an object with JavaScript, right? Because I can do get attribute. I can do that. I want to measure the width. So if I put in width, I can say the client width, the max width. I can do those things, right? But how do I do that? How do I get the width of my object? First of all, let's just put the object in by itself, the whole object, right? So width, my first project image, right? At this stage, tell me what it is at 75%. So I'll save this, and I go here, and now I'll look at the console for a second. This will give you hints on how to do it, right? Okay, hold on. So here's my 75%, and it says TQ width is object.html element. That did nothing. Okay, cool. So let's go back. Let's take this whole thing out of here and put it in here. So we're not going to put it in braces at all. I want the whole object itself. Click. Image, max width is 75. That's what it does. That actually embraces the style max width property, right? It puts a style width attribute. That's what it really does when I use my code here. And I click onto it. That's what it does. It injects style is equal to max width of 75%. Okay. So that's not what I want, right? So what about project.style, like you're saying, style.width? You're saying get that. But the property, can I do getter and setter? And if you look at it, if I click 75%, I get nothing. Doesn't know what the width is. Why is that? We didn't specify, but what if I specified instead of my max width is 75%, I said my max width is 150 pixels. Just to show you the difference. Does it tell me now? No. I'm going to specify max width. Max width is different than width, right? I didn't set a width ever. Never set a width for this thing, right? Okay, let's set a width. Do I set it here in my first project image? Well, no, I could set it as an attribute, right? And I would set that as in my CSS. I could say my first project image, my max height is this, right? And I could say my width, I could specify what my width is. My width is, as an example, 300, right? 300 pixels. My width is 300 pixels. My max height is 200, right? Now when I click onto this, I still don't get an image. I still can't get the width, even though I specified up here that the width is 300, right? What do I do? Is there another way of doing it? Even when I read it, if I read the actual whole image itself, right? So when I go back to this, right? And instead of reading the style width, how about if I do get attribute, right? So I want to get attribute, and then the name of the attribute, all right? So the name of the attribute would be as a string, width, right? Can I read it this way? And if I go back, and if I press 75, I get null. I don't have a width, right? I did it, came back with more than empty, came back with null, right? Huh? Yeah, I came back with null. It didn't do me anything, but I get attribute is this, width. But that's the width attribute, not the width style width or the image width. How do I get a width of an image? So again, if I was going to Google it, get image width, JavaScript. Right now they use jQuery to do that. I don't want to use jQuery. I want to use vanilla JavaScript with vanilla JavaScript. Vanilla JavaScript, no jQuery, right? I can get image height, right? Get image width, height width in JavaScript. Ideally, without loading, it says the image at all, right? How do I do that? There's a couple of answers. So this dot width is get width and height, right? Here's load failure, and then var my image is a new image. My image is a name, image.jpg, right? That's a different thing. This actually loads the image in, right? So I'm talking about my image source. That's what this is. Okay, well, that's easy to do, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm setting up another variable, right? Right? I'll say let my image itself, image lowercase image, is equal to a new image, right? It's empty right now. And I want to set the image source, so I can say image.source, right, is equal to first project image dot source. I could say that, right? Here's my source image. And what I want to do here, like it says, is I can return the width of my image. So when the image is loaded, right, on load, I could check to see what this dot width is and this dot height. Excuse me. Whew. Yeah. But what I want to do is I want to look at the image height or whatever. Is that possible? Can I do something like image dot height, image dot width? Yeah, I have a property, so I can maybe print it out. So let's try this out. So let's print it out up here. So console log image dot width. Okay. This image is actually an object that exists. Okay, and let's see what happens when I do this and I go back to here. I get 400. whoa, my image width is 400, right? That's accurate. How about my image? How about my image height? Right, 300. What if it's 75%? Right? Can I do my image height when it's 75%? Well, I'm modifying it. I'm making an event happen. I'm triggering an image change, right? I want to read the image in again, right? Well, if that's the case, right, and if I've made image.source equal to this, right, maybe this isn't what I want. Maybe I don't want to do a new image. Maybe what I want to do is, because this is an image attribute, right? Because I'm tapping into the image attribute itself. If I did the image itself, right, I get HTML element, right? That's the whole element, right? What if I only wanted that attribute, like the source attribute? So image.source is equal to project, the source of the image, right? That's an attribute. So this now, if I hover over it, it says it's a string, the URL of the media resource that is to be considered, right? That's not ever going to change. So unless I reload that thing again somehow, right? Like I'm just modifying the source of the image, right? Then what would it be? But I can calculate that. Instead of doing 75%, if I know that 300 is the maximum width, right? Maximum the size of the folders that I'm in, I'm able to find out another formula to do this. So instead of max width to 75%, I could say 300 times 75% of the original image. So I could do that. I could say something like this. I could say is equal to image width, right, times 0.75, right? 75% of the image width, right? And if I was to do that, that's when I go into my 3/4 size button. If I click it now, you can see that, oh, here's 50. Oh man, what happened? What happened here? How come I can't reach it in here? Does anyone know? I'm inside, this is another property, we're talking about events today. This is another issue with events. In the event, right, because I'm inside of a function in here, right, this is a callback function. I don't have access to anything else. I don't have access to all this stuff, which is causing me to have issues. I don't know if you know that, right? I can't look at this lit image.source. A lot of times when I do calculations of image width, right? Here's image width, image height, and image width. Here's my image. I've defined it up here, and it's down here, right? So image width is here. If I was going to say what my image width is, so here's my first get attribute. Oh, this is width, sorry. So if I want to print that out to show the image width itself, so if I was to, do my image width, I say my image width, right, times 75%, it should be whatever that is, right? It should be that number, right? So that'll return whatever I ask it. It's a calculation, but that doesn't mean that it's changing anything. Look, it just keeps on giving me 500 or 300, right? So image width, it's 400. That's 75%. It's 300. But why?
To keep the image width original.
Here it is.
Okay, it works for me, and how I did it is basically first project then image.src first project, image equals image.width times 75, and console login.
Yes, you could do that. So we're just talking about calculations here. So first project image.style.max width is what I'm calculating, right? Let's make it so that it's another number so we can see the difference. So max width is going to be equal to 20, right? So it's not going to be 75% anymore. I want to see a drastic change, right? Because we're saying, what you're saying is if I click this image, it's going to give me 20%. It doesn't give me anything. It doesn't do anything. This does, but this doesn't do anything. It doesn't know how to resolve this image width right now. It can't access image width. In fact, if I just press image width itself times 0.2, right? I can't get to it. Not inside that function. It's not available. Unless I take this stuff, cut it, and put it in here, but you're going to see some real issues now, right? So first project image, right? I want to kind of say one of these. I create a new, inside here, inside this function. Remember we talked about functions last week? Inside this functions, I'm going to say here, let my image is equal to new image. Here's my image source. And now I have access to my image width, right? Whatever the image width is based on the image source. And I multiply that by 75%, right? That's a different thing. It's going to go 300, right? And now if I do this times 75, right, we should be able to get something different. Let's take a look. So about 75, 300, I get a number now, right? Didn't change anything, right? Didn't change anything, the number. Why didn't it change anything? Because when I do this, my friends, I do a calculation. What is it looking for from a style perspective? String, right? Does this convert automatically to a string? You don't know. That's the answer. So what you should do is, there's a couple ways you can do this, right? Which converts it to a string. I could do this. So 75%, 50, that doesn't do it. I could try and say my image width, this is in pixels, right? So whatever it is plus this, it doesn't know what, remember, it's just numbers. It's a number right now, right? So I could do my image width is equal to this plus pixels, right? Because I'm kind of putting together what it's going to be. And I could put this in brackets just to make sure there's order of operations, right? So whatever this is a number plus pixels makes this a string, and it combines to add this to max width. Let's try this. So 75, 50, 75. Now it grows back. That worked. See that? 50, 75? Didn't work before. It didn't work before because it was giving me a number, 300. And in our style, which is CSS, requires some kind of unit of measure, whether it's percentage or whether it's pixels. Okay? So again, is 75 the right amount? If I click onto it, right, 75, show, this goes to maximize, 50, 75 is actually 75 now, right? 75% of the actual image, whatever the original image was, okay? Okay, but maybe that's not what we want, right? We have 4 columns. Each column is 8%. It means the maximum size of the columns are, if it's full screen, whatever the column width is. And I want it to be responsive, because if I give it a solid value, right, whatever the value is, that could be bad. It would be a fixed pixel image, right? So it's going to kind of override the whole flexibility piece, right? So that would be an issue. Maximum width is equal to this. But notice how it worked now with my image, but before it didn't. Now let's try what you said. Now maybe that wasn't the problem. The problem was it was getting 0, not pixels. So I'm going to take this out and I put it out here, right? Will it still work? And 50, 75 still works, right? So the reason why I couldn't read it before is because it wasn't in the right format. It wasn't pixels anymore. So times 75% gives you a number of pixels, and we get a pixel count, right? All right, so we can get that. That's one way to get the pixel if we really wanted to. And I'm pointing this out because sometimes we have these issues with layout and so on, right? But this is really messy. And I told you before the break that I want to fix this problem. I have all these buttons, right? Isn't there a way that all the buttons could use the same event handler somehow? Is there a way to do it? And I think there is. We're going to have to recode some of this, all right? So please don't panic when I do it, all right? I'm going to erase everything, there's a lot of code here, and create my event handler again. It's a good opportunity for you guys to see it again, right? And give me some other. This is option 2. And forget this image thing right now, okay? So I want to get rid of everything underneath. So I'll keep the references for now. I'll get rid of all of this. So step 1 is there. Step 2. Here's step 2. Step 2 is I got to make some kind of event handler, right? So create one event handler or event listener, right? One event listener for all of them. Is that possible? Can I make an event listener for all of them? No, I can't do that. Here's another problem. right? I have all these buttons on the screen: hide button, half size button, 3/4 size button, show button, all these things right here, right? I have all these objects, right? And how could I? Yes.
Couldn't we use like one to 900, but in function with different argument?
Okay, let's slow down. Let's do this. I have a bunch of buttons, right? And I want to use one event handler to rule them all. One listener to, to kind of listen to them all. Or that's impossible, right? I can't do that. I need to have one listener per button, right? But I need one event handler to do it, and I want to do it in a little bit nicer. Instead of taking like lines and lines of code, like we just did lines and lines of code, right? I want to do like a much slicker, much more efficient way. What's some way we can do it? First of all, these are all objects, right? Each one of these are elements, yeah? Could I not create an array of elements? That's the first thing. I could, right? Let's call this the button array, okay? If I wanted to. So we'll go in here and we'll say, I'll use my lets, right? Because Rich told me that he says no more var, Tom. He says var is done. Var is the old way. We don't use var anymore, we use lets. And I agree, right? I gotta cater to my visitor. We'll call this the button array. Yay, button array. And we're going to say, we don't know what's inside this button right now, but we know I can do something like this if I wanted to, right? My button array, yeah? Well, yeah, I could do this, and if I hover over it, Visual Studio Code tells us it's an array of any. That means it could be any kind of types. However, I have the names of my array, yeah? I do. I could make it just by putting them inside of there. I can say, well, I want my hide button, and I want my half size button, and I have my 3/4 button. By the way, there's another way of doing this too. We'll do this one first. Here's my show button. All right, these are all the buttons. Now if I do that and I hover over it, it says, it's an array of HTML elements. It's not just any array. They're all the same, HTML element array. If I have an array, that means each of these buttons have a position. Yeah? How about this? Arrays have special properties in JavaScript. Not only they can be kind of, I can access them through indices, but I can actually treat them like a dictionary sometimes. I don't know if I can do this, but could I access the array with the name of the button? Like, I don't know, something like this. First of all, could I do something like, well, my button array, right? Again, we're just kind of making this up here, right? That's the hide button, right? I want to show this one. I want to show the button array that's the hide button. So console.log, button array hide button. Is that possible? Who knows, right? We're going to figure this out. Save. And if I go back down to here's my buttons, nice little buttons. And I'm going to go to inspect. And let's go to console, and I have undefined. That didn't work, right? What other ways could I do it? It's the way I defined it, right? Look at the way I defined it. I defined them like this. But there's another way I could define them. I could say button array hide button, right? I could do that is equal to hide button. I could do individual ones, and that's another way I could do it. Like, so this is one way, an array of HTML elements, right? But arrays have this ability as well, right? Hide button and whatever, right? The great thing about this is I can iterate through them. I can loop through the buttons. Each button, I can assign its own event handler, right? I could do that, its own event listener. And I can use one loop to do that. This would be nice if I could do this, because then I can access the button, right? But at least I can remember here that this is button 0, this is button 1, this is button 2, this is button 3, if I really need to. But I really don't need to. Okay, and you'll see this in a sec. Let's try this out. So I go for, can I use a for each? Can I use a for loop? I mean, what if I had 5 more buttons to this button array, right? I want all the buttons to have click events, right? Huh? I could do that, but I want to do something like if I type in for each, the great thing about Visual Studio Code is it'll actually code it for you. It'll say array, whatever the array name is, for each, and I'll show you how to do it. So when I say button array, right, button array, for each, and then I've got an anonymous callback. Here's the callback function. All these callback functions, we talked about them last week, and they're a pain, yeah? So when we see them, we're like, oh man, it's like a function within a function. Don't panic. That's the number one thing we say, right? It's looking for the type, this is the element that we're looking for, right? We're going to call this the button, right? And this button represents each of the buttons in each iteration. Every time I loop, button is going to represent the different buttons inside my array. It's going to point to the other button. So the first time it loops through this, right, it's going to point, button is going to point to hide button. The second time, button is going to point to half size button. The third time, button is going to point to 3/4 size buttons, and then finally show button. Okay? So if that's the case, then I can do something like this. I can say button dot add event listener, the click event. We can add the click event, right? And I can have another function in here. Oh boy, function help. There we go. With the event that I want. Here's my event that I'm listening for, right? Okay, so this is what I could do. Now, is this understandable to you, this syntax? Take a look again. So one for each loop runs through each of the buttons. I'm adding a click listener to each one of them. And I also have an inline function that I can register a handler. But the handler is going to be, I want to use one handler for all the buttons, right? One handler for all the buttons. Well, I can tap into something called this event object. The event object, right, allows me to kind of see which button I clicked on. Okay, so let's try this out. So if I go here, and if I go console log, and I'll say the button, which button is it? I don't know what oh man, am I doing it right? I got to use backtick. Backtick is the new one, right? I can't use this stuff. I can't use concatenation anymore. That's not right in ECMAScript 2016. Rich, it's backtick, interpolation. So we're going to do button, the $, and open curly braces, and then we're going to go button, right? We want to do that. I want to see which button it is. I want to get a sense of what each of these buttons are, right? Well, that's not what I want. I want event. I want the event dot target, right? Or current target is what I really want. So event dot current target basically tells us which button is being clicked. Event dot current target. So it's going to return an element, right? Okay. Let's see what happens. Okay, this is the code, the syntax, and we'll get back to this in a second. All right, so we're refreshed already, and I want to click on 50%, and it says button object. Oh man, what the hell? What? I can't get information from that. It's I'm using interpolation. I'm getting some kind of button and target, but that's not what I want. Okay, how about the event current target dot, and I want the inner text, right? Inner, or I want to say the text content. Here we go, text content. So I'm saying this, I'm saying, give me the event, current target, the text content of the button. This is chaining. This is what it's called, right? So the event itself points to which button is being pressed, right? The event that's being raised. I got the click event happening, right? But wait a minute, which button raised the event? So that's this one. This current target tells me which button raised the event, which button caused the event to happen, triggered the event, right? And this part here tells me, okay, get the text content. What's inside that button? Right? So I can get an idea of what button it is, right? Let's try this again. So if I go 50%, yay, right? It says button, the 50% button, hide. The hide button, the 75 button, okay, the show button. That's what these buttons are, right? So I can use one event, right, by looping through each of the buttons and targeting each of the buttons by using the event object, right, as well as the current target. I'm kind of narrowing it down to which button was that clicked on me. Current target is that button, right? And then the text content gives me a clue of which one it is. All right, now that I have that, if I know the current target, depending on what the current target is and the text content, I can switch the buttons. I can say something like, well, if it's this button, then do this. But what's another way? I could look at the ID, right? I have the ID. Look, each of these buttons has the ID. It's the whole element. I've got the whole element here when I pulled it in, right? So when I'm looping, I have access to everything, not just the text. I have access to the ID. And that's another thing I can do. I can do something like this. I can say event.currentTarget.getAttribute, right? could do that, get attribute. And it doesn't show me the thing, but I can do get at, and the string attribute that I want is the ID, right? The ID of the attribute. I want to return that out. Okay, so that's the other thing I want. Can I return that, right? So I'm getting it by, I got the ID here, but now I want to detect which one it is, right? That's another way of doing it. Let's see if that works. Go back here and click 50%. Button, half size button, right? The 3/4 size button, yay. Well, the hide button, the show button. So depending on what it is, I know which button it is. Now that I know which button it is, I can create conditional statements to say that if it's this button, then do this effect. If it's that button, then do that effect, and so on. So I can use one event to rule them all, just like Lord of the Rings, right? Okay, let's take it up. See if we can do this thing. A little bit of code, right? But we know we can use this event current target get attribute ID to find out what it is. And I can put this inside of a switch statement. So I can switch this. I can say switch. Now we had a switch within a switch, but that's okay. So this is what it looks like. This is the syntax. So I'm switching the event current target. So let me kind of make some annotations. So get, so check, I'll say check which button has been clicked. Right, that's what this is doing, this line here. And depending on which it is, I can say, well, if it's case, if in case it's the hide button, right, then do something, right? In case it's the half size button, then do something else. And in case it's the 3/4 button, then do something else. Notice I'm putting the brakes as like we did before. And in case we're the show button, then do something else. These are all the things we want to do. And we want to do all these things we talked about. Hide button, we want to do that same event we did last time, which is, now here's something that I want to talk about. This is really ugly, no? Event.currentTarget.getAttributeID, that's a really long thing. And if I keep doing that over and over again, I'm actually getting that information over and over again. If I got that information, I can store it in a variable locally here inside of this button, right? I have button, but button may not be available inside of this function because it's inside here. And I can say something like, well, what is this button that I speak of? That means any button, right? I could try and do it this way. But what I really want to do is something like this. Maybe I'll use a let, and I'll say current button. My current button, whatever the button clicked is, or button clicked, right, is equal to this. I can say this. Current button is equal to all this. So I'm going to cut this out and put it here to make it easy. So that this is kind of get the, kind of decide which button or find out which button, right? So which button, store, I'll say store, which button has been clicked in current button. That's what I want to do, right? And then when I switch it, so it depends on which one it is, I can say, well, whatever the current button is, if the current button is hide button, then do something. And that makes more sense both visually to you and logically, right? Because when I've just named a variable, I've created a variable that has context. It makes sense. You can read it, and you can kind of understand what I'm trying to do here. So I'm saying, well, what is it? Right? Okay. Hide button. Remember what we did with hide button? We said current button dot, and what I want to do with the current button is what? I want to get the style, right, and make the display none. So dot style dot display, right, is equal to none. How come I'm not getting really good code hinting here? Because current button is any in this case. It's trying to figure out what this thing is. Event.currentTarget.getAttributeID, right? Let's continue for now. Just bear with me when we do this, right? And we said that in the same case, when I do my show button, not only does it show block, right? But I also want to make it so that the maximum size is 100%, right? So I want to say current button dot style, right, dot max width, right? That's equal to 100%. Is it max width or max dot width? Do you remember? If you can't remember, you can always try it out here. We know that button is a button, right? And if I go style.max-width, it is. I can see the buttons up here. But man, I wish I had access to that button. Wish I had access to that button. Do I have access to that button? No, don't make anything global. I don't like globals. Besides, it won't work. How can you make it global? Come on. Yes, you could make it, but it's very ugly. I don't want that. I want to make it so self-encapsulated somehow. Do I have access to a button in here? Can I do something like button, right? It says parameter button HTML element, right? Do I even need this event target? Just saying, right? Well, if that was the case, if I said first of all, let's try it one way, and then we'll try it the other way. So let's just leave it like this. So I want to maximize and show and hide. That's it. Those are the two effects I want for now, before we do the other ones. All right, so here we'll refresh. So hide. Oh man, what happened? Uncaught type error, cannot set property display of undefined. At HTML button element anonymous. See what's happened? We got our get attribute. Well, that's the attribute ID, right? And then that's the button. I meant the target, right? It's not the get attribute ID. That's what I want to. I want to kind of switch that. Oh man, I want the current button. That's what I want. I want to switch that button, right? But I want the button.innerText or whatever it is, right? Or the name or the ID somehow in here, right? I want to do this, but I don't want to do all this all the time. I wonder if I can do that. Well, let's try this out. So if I say equals to button, right? Button.getAttributeID. That's this button up here on the outside of the function. Right? Remember we talked about scope? Right? Let's see if this works. Hide. No. It says uncaught type error, cannot set property display of undefined button. Button ID. Man, oh man. What the hell? I don't know what's going on here. Well, this is okay, right? Maybe that'll work. Or maybe what I really mean is current button dot get attributes ID. That one might work, right? Because I want to get this button, but I want to use this button, not the event. And if I try that, then, oh man, I made the button hide, not the image. Look, it hid. It went away, my button. That's not what I want. I don't want to hide my current button, right? I don't want my current button to hide. I want my image to hide, which is up here, my first project image, this one, right? I want to do this. I want to say this one I'm going to hide. Depending on what my button is, I want to hide that one, right? You guys didn't correct me. I just did this, and you're like, yeah, okay, go ahead. Now if I do this, I can see that it hides and shows, right? Hides and shows. I can hide and show my button. And I didn't need to even do this. I didn't even need to get my event. And the reason why I didn't have to do all that crazy stuff is because of this button, because of my for each loop. My for each loop, because it's the outside function, and there's a function inside. We did this last week. Remember I said, if I have an outside function, I set a variable, then what happens on the inside? Because the child function is inside of a closure, this one here, that means I can inherit the outside, the parent function's parameters, right? And that's what I've done. But I could do it the other way too. I could do event.currentTarget is the button. I could do this equally as well. I could say that's the current button. And if you notice, if I do it again, that still works, right? So either one, event.currentTarget or this button up here. If you didn't have this for each loop out here, you could do event.currentTarget. So I'm going to kind of comment that out. I'm going to say this is one possibility. I'll say one way of doing it, one way of doing it, right? I'm getting a reference to the button, right? And the other way that I like is the button itself, because we have access. So I'll kind of do this, and we'll just say this is just the button, right? And then I can switch this through, and we're good to go. All right, let's keep going. So we got a first button style, Okay, I like this part, and I want to kind of make my half-size button, change my max width. So max width. Max width will be 50%. We said that, right, to make it simple. You know what? I also want to have a display of block. I want to kind of put this display of block maybe in there as well, because this makes sense that we have that, like you said before, actually. It doesn't make sense that my display wouldn't be block when I'm clicking on a 50%, right? The show is like 100%. That's what it really is. Okay, and I'll do the same thing. I'll copy these two lines and go into 3/4. And so you can see now that the 3/4 button is 75%, still display block. And when I go back, you can see that I have 50%, 75%. My show is a little bit bigger, and my hide hides it all together. And I did it with one event handler, right? Let's take a look at the code one more time. Hey, didn't we say, wait a minute, Tom, you should say, Tom, wait a minute. Tom, you said that this was going to be simpler, right? This is going to be cleaner. This is going to be, I even used the word sexier, right? Is this cleaner, more nicer code? Do you think this is nicer for you? Hell no is the answer. Is it more efficient? Yeah, it's more efficient because I don't have to use multiple handlers. I'm only registering one handler for a bunch of listeners. That's a positive thing, right? So from that perspective, it's better. Is it more readable? I don't know. I think that's debatable. And I think that's where we have to go somehow to the basics. That's why I showed you the basics first. Here's the basics. Remember I said big movements, big movements. Make sure it's like, big and ugly first, right? So you understand the ugly form. This is a little nicer, but it's more complex. And you have to know how to do this too. Sometimes it solves some problems in here, but it doesn't mean that this is the only way. Before I stop this example, is there anybody that has a different method that they figured out? For any of you, did you figure out something else? No? How else could you do this? Now I did it this way, right? So I did it with a for each loop on the outside and a button array, la 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 la. You could do this. I could set up the individual event listeners by itself. I could do that too, right? I could also chain. I could do it in one line if I really want to. That's really ugly, right? But I'm telling you it's possible. So you understand the forms, right? So I could set it up so that way, yes.
Okay, one question.
Yes.
We put we attach to the buttons one function.
Uh-huh.
They just return a different value.
Yes.
An argument.
Yes.
And that's 50%, 75%, or block or hide.
Right.
Would it work?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Like a value for each of the buttons,
yeah.
Right? One function to call, right? So you're saying instead of doing all this, see this right here? This.
One function.
I could do a function, yeah, I could do, but that's the same thing. It's like doing a named function. So that's another way. I can make a named function, right? Okay, let's do that one. But there's a problem now. There's a problem. What's the problem? That you can see. Well, here's the problem. I have to pass in button. See this button here? This button here, I have to pass it in, right? If I was going to do that. So I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So here's button.event listener, but you want to chop out this whole thing. That's what you're saying, pretty much, right? Chop out this whole thing, cut it out. Hold on, here it is, right? And what you want to do is make another function down here somewhere. Whereas we'll say, we'll call this let the button click event, something like a button click function. Button click is equal to this function, right? That's what you're saying. Now, I don't want to pass an event. I want to pass in the button, right? Because I want to definitely pass in that. So I want to take in a button. So the button here is the button that comes into this thing, right? And I want to pass in the button when I call it. So in here in the calling area, I'm going to call this button click. I'm going to pass in the button. That might work. We might have some issues. Now notice that I'm calling the function, but I can't really do this. This is the problem with event handlers, right? Take a look. Why would this be a problem, right? Remember we talked about named events? I could do this, right? What I'm saying is this button click event is the callback handler, the reference for this button click event is the callback handler for everything else. But then I would lose the button context, this button context. Then I would have to go back to event, right? where my event.currentTarget, right? My events.currentTarget is the button, right? That's different. This is the other way you could do it, right? So again, I have this little iterator. So this one would be loop through the array of buttons, right? That's what this does. And then this part is set an event listener for each button, whatever button that is, right? And then my button click event would handle them all, right? Let this button click event use one event, use one named function, right, which is called button click, to respond to each of the buttons. That's what we're doing, right? Now let's see if this works. Nice theory. We want to see if it works in practice, right? So event.currentTarget, so we're targeting. And we go back here and we refresh the screen. And if I click hide, oh man, hold on. Let's see. I want to inspect the code and see what my errors are, right? Oh gosh. Reference, button click is not defined. Wait a minute. Button click. Well, look, we got a button click. We can't send this argument. Look, it says let button click is equal to function. Oh man, can't do it this way, right? Could I write it this way? How about this? Can I do this? Would that work? No, it's not the same. Remember? If I click on it now, it works.
Oh, okay.
Why is the other way? Why is this way different? What's this? What's different about this? Remember what we talked about before, right? There's two ways of declaring a function. Here's one way, right? Let the name of a variable, button click, equal to an anonymous function. That is valid, right? And normally that would be okay. But I have a problem here. I have a problem because button click itself, because I've declared it down here as a let, right? We talked about not using lets, right? Because I declared it down here as a let, and if I make this a var, let's see if that works as a var. Just to show you this idea here. Hide, and then show, and it's not even working. No, I got nothing, right? So var is not working. Let's gives me an error, right? Let gives me this error, right? Uncaught exception, doesn't understand what button click is. But when I put function in here in the beginning, so if I say function, and then I put a name function like this, right? That works fine. And why is that the case? This would be a great exam question for top marks if you got it. By the way, it's a hard question to answer. Let's see, Rich. I'm gonna have to ask Rich and see if he knows the reason, because he's a smart guy, right? By the way, it took me a while to figure this out, right? So it's not a smart, stupid thing. It's just because the idiosyncrasies of JavaScript. So let me go back to this. So this, right, will error out. Let button click, there we go, equal to this anonymous function. What am I doing here? I'm creating an alias, right? So button click points to this anonymous function that's taking in an event. Oh, that's not what's happening here. When I create add event listener and I'm pointing to this function, I'm saying, hey, this is a pointer, right? I'm pointing it to this anonymous function that returns void, right? But this doesn't do that. Notice when I hover over this event any void, and when I try and do this, because take a look, this is inside of this button array, right? And it's in a for each loop, and I'm using an event handler. I can't pass any kind of data to it, any kind of parameter. It gives me this error. But if I write it this way, and this is the phenomenal, Rich. Here, watch this. If I write it this way, so this way, right? If I go back here, I get an uncaught accepted, right? But if I write it this way, same function, and just get rid of this, right? This is the name function way. I come back, no error, and when I click onto it, Yay, we got functionality. Right? That's JavaScript for you, huh? You'll look at it and you'll cry sometimes, but don't cry. I want you to think of it like this. Events give rise to special situations, right? Remember I told you about scope? The scope of the event itself is changed. You don't carry forward the variable, the context inside this event, right? And because you don't do that, you need to do this kind of named event when you want to use an event handler. By the way, do you think this is cleaner? Maybe. Maybe it's a little bit more readable. It's not wrong to do this. So your idea, right, is correct. This is okay to do, right? Now I have a named event that I do the same thing. I still switch everything and blah, blah, blah. I still need to do that somehow, right? But it's one named event that I can use and is a separate function, and I can kind of break up the functionality here as opposed to put it all inline. So going back to the PowerPoint, we talked about all of this in the PowerPoint. It talks about that JavaScript is event-driven, right? The whole thing. And you can make events point to any DOM element, right? That's what this talks about. And there's two types of things we need to do. We need to set up an event handler. We call it registering an event handler, right? And we need to set up an event listener. There's two parts, right? The event listener listens, and the event handler, when an event is triggered, it responds, right? We need both sides. We cannot handle an event unless we're listening for it. And we cannot just listen for an event without a handler. You can't do anything. It doesn't do anything if you just listen. Well, I heard you, but I'm not doing anything, right? That's what the listener does. Without a callback function, it doesn't work, right? So that's the requirements. And inside the PowerPoint, if you read carefully, it talks about, they give different examples of here. One of the examples is this example here. And I want to focus in on it. And I talked about, kind of the best approach to doing it. Notice they use the .onClick that equals a function. I don't recommend it, okay? Please don't use this methodology as much as possible. Could you use this methodology, .button on click? Yes, you could. What you're doing here, you're saying the onClick event, make a reference to this anonymous function, right? And for beginners, it's hard to see this, to understand what this does, right? So I don't recommend this functionality, this syntax. That's one way of doing it, right? You can also do inline events inside the code. I don't recommend that at all, because that means it's, HTML, whatever your page is, that page specifically, it handles the event. We don't want that. It means that if I switch to another page, that means I've lost and there's no event handling for that kind of thing at all, right? It's only inline, just for that page, which I don't recommend. It means you have to use, you can't use that, my beautiful app.js, right? Here's what I recommend, this functionality here, this anonymous function style, right, is the way I recommend it, okay? So element.add event listener, and then the type of event, we've just been focusing on click event today because that's the most common event, right? There's other ones. And then an anonymous function to handle the event. So this is the event listener on this side, and then inside this anonymous function, we can do the event handler, right? And it talks about event listener and event handler. So that's the other way, okay? So again, we say that the event listener listens for events and the event handler captures the events and responds to them, okay? Notice there's also this comma false. We didn't talk about this, and I could put that in. That's another thing we haven't used. This false, it's a true or false Boolean option at the end, is another part that you can put in. And what that says is, do I want to bubble up my listener? And for now, what I want you to do is ignore this and just leave it off. It's false by default anyway. Just don't put it in there. All right, you don't need to know about this right now. We'll talk about it later when we hit objects, okay? So everything we talked about here, the capture Boolean, if we're capturing or not, everything we're talking about here, it just gives you examples similar to what we've just done, right? By the way, attach event, whenever you see attach event, that you know from a backwards compatibility that this is an old Microsoft thing for dealing with older browsers. And right now, I really don't care about browsers older than IE 10, okay, for now. So please, if you see this, attach event, and someone says, if in a studio you've been asked to do this from a backwards compatibility, there is another keyword for this, as opposed to add event listener, which is attach event. Attach event is a Microsoft thing that works for older browsers, right? And that's if one of them doesn't work. If the event listener doesn't work, then you know what you want to do. You want to try and use the other option. Okay, just going to zoom out again. So I'm not going to talk too much more about this stuff because I've covered everything with our little tutorial today, right? Everything that you need for the semester, for the first part of the semester anyway, when it comes to binding and unbinding. We can talk about this later on. Binding and unbinding is more of an advanced feature. How you can attach events and remove them, right? The way to do it would be remove event listener, right? Remove event listener is the most common way of doing it. If you can attach an event listener, you can remove an event listener. Removing an event listener detaches the event, right? And removes it from the event loop, right? And why we want to do that sometimes is when we want to clean up our functions, right? Because we want to do some cleanup. When we're done with that particular page and we're on to another page, we can remove event listeners. And what that does is it cleans up, because once you've registered an event in the event loop, it's registered forever until you remove it, right? For the life of that page. So please be aware of that. We're going to handle mouse and keyboard events later, right? Even though today's event day, I wanted you really to get a good hold of and a good handle over, right? Button click events. Button click events are the most common events, right? Keyboard events are really cool when it comes to doing validation and forms. We can use keyboard type events, like moving from one form to the other. Those are all the kind of events. But I can't possibly cover event handling and just doing events in one day. There's just no way, because you need more examples. I did this one time when I kind of covered it in one class, and I'll tell you right now that people got lost, right? They were like, I don't understand events. At least now you've been given a lot of different opportunities to see different kinds of button click events and different ways to handle them. And now we can build on that knowledge next time, all right? Because it's kind of similar when it comes to other types of events. Mouse movement events, if I move my mouse around the screen, I can raise an event. When I hover over a button, it raises an event. When I move away from a button, it raises an event. When I click into a field, it raises an event. You know, anything that I want, click on the background of my screen, raises an event, right? So you can do all kinds of events. Press my button on my keyboard, raises an event, right? And all that's inside the PowerPoint. If you really had to use any of it, you could always read the PowerPoint temporarily for now. But I'm going to cover all the different kinds of keyboard events that we would use and the most common reasons why we use them. Remember, tonight you have a lab 2, which is a checkpoint for assignment number 2, right? It's to make sure that you started assignment number 2. Remember, assignment number 2, I wanted to have its own Git repository, right? Please don't use the same Git repository as assignment number 1, right? Even though it's an extension of assignment number 1, I want it to have its own Git repository. And I don't want it to, and it has to have its own link. So if you're using Azure for assignment number 2, that's fantastic, right? I want it to have a different link. I don't want it to be assignment number 1 for both assignment number 1 and assignment number 2. Make another link. You can make as many as you want within reason. Questions? Next week, remember, assignment number 2 is due, right? Today's Wednesday. It'll be due on next Tuesday. I'm using Rich's trick, right? Because if I make it due on the Wednesday, some people won't come in, right? Because your assignment number 2 will be done. You'll be due, and you'll be doing that instead of coming into class. So please get her done. It's due the night before our meet date next week. That's the Tuesday night at midnight, okay? That's when assignment number 2 is due, if I'm not wrong. Remember also that next week is review week, because we're reviewing some stuff that that's going to be on the exam, right? And remember, week 7, not next week, but the week after, is exam week. I'm also going to introduce some minor things next week that I want to talk to you about. But mostly what we're talking about next week is review for the exam. So be ready for that. It's important. I'm giving you fair warning. I might do a little quiz, right? Like a multiple choice true false quiz for bonus points. Okay? So if you're here on that day and you're willing to answer the quiz, there'll probably be a short quiz, 5 to 10 questions. We'll see how it goes, right? And it'll give you a good indication if you know what's going on with the exam and the work that you're going to be doing there. Any questions before we depart for the day? Yes. Yes, I can. Thank you for that. Otherwise, guys, thank you so much. Have a great day, and we'll see you next week. Yes.
Could you explain a little better when you have a function and then the parameters of that, how that works?
Just a moment. Let me just stop recording. Okay, take care.